This is for the nerds, this is for the brainiacs, this what we deserve. Go ahead and play it back, you ain't gonna touch me, you not gonna do nothing, you are not above me, I bet you wish you was me, I know it, I know.
What's up, everybody?
How you doing?
There's some shit to get to today, boys.
And girls.
And girl. I hate these shows.
Yeah, me too.
I hate these shows. I enjoyed the reaction video. Well, I don't know if I enjoyed it, but I enjoyed doing a reaction video to the Brink Kenny interview both times. Cause you feel like you're
It's a negative free roll.
yeah, you kind of feel like you're moving in a good direction. These touchy subjects that probably, I don't know. It's weird because, right, we have all these platforms within the space, and a lot of us are just friends for long periods of time. So sometimes you see emotional debates that are probably better served between two friends behind closed doors play out in public. Mm-hmm. And man, there's like some really great things that interview will lead to a discussion on, but also at the same time, like, I feel so awful for everybody who's involved.
Nobody wins here.
Yeah. It feels like such a loss. Mostly for Ebony, not because Joey's not taking one on the chin today as well, but more so because like this was her week.
Yeah.
Right. Like this is your moment in the sun. This is your time to shine. It's an absolute career defining type of situation that happened. Now it kind of gets poo-pooed by a lot of this controversy that is unnecessary is a good starting point, but also just maybe more so
Poorly timed.
Definitely poorly timed. For sure poorly timed. But more so like unable to be resolved. Right? Like when we start talking, and we'll get into this as the show rolls on, but like when we get into the bigger conversation of this all, it wasn't like there was going to be any sort of conclusion reached or mountain moved whenever it comes to the issues that this industry faces and how Joey and Ebony and all of us as bystanders kind of play a role. Right? So it's especially unfortunate to be undermined in your like moment in the sun whenever it's over something where it's just like this is a philosophical problem.
Yeah.
Right. For anybody who doesn't know what we're talking about, we are discussing the Joey Ingram Ebony Kenney interview from yesterday. It was meant to be a bit of a victory lap for Ebony as she came off a career defining moment, finishing 5th in the 200K coin rivet. I'm
not Doug Rugg.
Honestly,
Doug Rugg Invitational.
How brutal is it that the more notable name of the two is the one that fucking rugged?
It's usually like that though.
It's an earworm for me now. I can't get it right.
Yeah.
No matter how hard I keep pounding coin rivet into my head, I'm going to constantly go back.
Let's reach out to CoinFlex. Maybe they'll sponsor an invitational.
I got to tell you, Melissa, I don't think they have any funds left.
Oh.
Best I can tell from the repayment plan. Last I heard was 10 cents on the dollar.
Oh.
Not a good.
Their customers definitely don't have any funds left.
Well, that's for sure. Crypto's dropped and the liquidity has gone with it. All right.
Anyways,
that aside,
we have to go on a tangent.
The Doug Rugg aside, the terrible. I don't know what to say about it. She got 5th place in the 200K coin rivet invitational, the Pro-Am, and this is. We already spoke about, we dedicated an episode to this once. I do think it's worth re-highlighting again. Like, we are, and me particularly, I'm so jaded. And I think to a degree, the audience also is. We're so numb to the big numbers getting thrown around.
Yeah.
100%.
We're so numb to faces that have been around for a while and, are kind of given an opportunity or granted a big score. We talked about this a little bit with Grafton winning winning the 200K for 5.5 million, where
it's such a big number, dude.
It's massive. It's such a big. It was 119 players or 118 players, something like that.
It's truly
for 200K.
It's such a big number. For some reason, it feels so small.
I know, it's weird.
Right.
It's over half.
I feel like our perspectives on these numbers are completely.
They're so warped.
They're warped.
It's over
they're
half
so
the
warped.
main event.
Right.
First place prize.
Right. And it's for years the main event was like between 7 and 8 million, and that was like close to its peak. So it's not that far off, and I think it's because the buy-in is so high. It kind of shuts us as a community out. Like, we know we're never playing that.
Right.
But that's exactly
100
why
players play it.
Right. But that's
Very
exactly why the Ebony Kenney story should be so surreal.
Yeah.
Right. Like.
Right. Someone that's not in the arena goes to the arena, wins infinite dollars, like winning 1.7 million. It's a massive number, but just because of the high roller scene, because of the higher influx of buy-ins that have happened, it feels like it doesn't mean anything, but it means a fucking lot.
Right.
Like, imagine winning 1.7.
Well, that's the thing. We made a movie out of this in 2016.
Right.
Yeah.
And I was playing, like, yes, the buy-in.
You were that person.
Right. Sort of, right? Like, not to this degree.
Not to this degree. No.
Ebony was playing 2.5 a
not
week
to this
ago.
degree. You were playing super high stake cash.
Right. Like, I had already had, I got fifth for 1.1 million. And at that point, it was my biggest tournament score. Didn't even come close to my biggest cash game win. I'd won almost double that. Right. So it's like, we made that narrative. We created it because it's like, I wasn't a tournament player. This was a massive buy-in, and it was getting all the public attention and shine. And like, it was a true event back then. Right.
Right.
So we formulated this whole dead money, like he can't win type of narrative. And when it plays out favorably, it's obviously a great story. And to that end, I think like Ebony had a crew following her, and she's going to have something very similar that comes out of this. It's going to be fantastic to watch. But it's so easy for us publicly to gloss over this.
Yeah.
Right. Like,
it's easy to move on to the next thing that happens because someone's going to win something for X million and just we're going to kind of dust it. That's what happens with news. It gets old.
yes, that's true. But also I think that we lose the gravity of the situation in the sense that
100%.
We don't do a good enough job as a community to kind of like elevate and portray Ebony for who she is and her relevance to this whole narrative, right?
100%.
And I think that that's what this podcast was meant to do. When we say victory lap, it's not a puff your chest and get your shine kind of thing, right? It's more so like introducing Ebony and her relevance to the community, to those who don't already know.
Right. It's like, if you didn't know, here's a piece for you.
Yeah. And, there were some really touching points. She was very vulnerable throughout this. There were points, the first 2 hours of the podcast were like exactly that and pretty fantastic.
Right.
I don't know Ebony super well, but I know her throughout the years, have interacted with her. We've had conversations, whatever. She was very forward with the human element of this. And it really does turn into a really great human interest story when you hear things like, she was on food stamps 5 years ago. It's like, I'm sure that wasn't public knowledge prior to that. And it's not something that when you're in the shit, you're going to have a very easy time admitting. But when you're on the other side of the shit and you've just had some life altering score or wait for it, windfall.
There it is. Bingo.
When you have a windfall, it's a lot easier to kind of reflect and say like, look guys, like it's been an uphill battle. And, kind of like what we were saying with the Grafton thing, where it's like, it's easy to just look at this and say, hey, he's been around a while or she's been around a while. Like a big score was bound to come.
Right.
Happy for her. But this isn't going to be front page news for me kind of thing.
Right.
And what they're trying to say is like, no, you don't understand what went into this, right? Like this result may have been a byproduct of variance, but let me tell you about the path that led to this. Let me tell you about the ups, the downs, the struggles, like how close I was to being out of the game altogether. Effectively, the last 5 to 10 years for her, it was very much a roller coaster, right? It's the life of a grinder, but more importantly, like she's a mom on top of that. She has responsibilities. She had a terrible medical scare with her son that I don't know if she mentioned it in the pod. I don't recall her mentioning it, but I know that it was public for a while where his life was kind of hanging in the balance. That takes a toll on you. Your career takes a back seat. You don't have the ability to just persevere through that and chase your lofty expectations of yourself whenever you have to sacrifice for another. So these stories are so fascinating to highlight. They really do create the character of who Ebony is and why we should care that she got this windfall, right? Why we should be celebrating and championing for her beyond the fact that she's a minority or that she's a woman, right? Because I think that tends to be what gets too much of the attention.
I agree.
Do you think that when it comes to this stuff, the vast majority has a bad perception of humanizing or understanding someone else's accomplishments, maybe due to jealousy, due to lack of opportunity, or things of that nature, where people think, oh, if I had that opportunity, I would do this, I would do that?
Yeah, I think that it's difficult for, well, I guess it depends on like what type of fan you are, right? Because like the further removed you are, I think the easier it is to just kind of like applaud and say, hey, hell of a job, really proud of what you've done. You know, I'm here for it. And I think of like myself watching sports, right? It's very easy for me to watch an NFL game and just be like, these guys are monsters. Like
100%.
I could never do what they do. I just respect everything that's going on out there. Yada. But then like I might watch a baseball game with, you know, some like half-wit lefty who's throwing 85, thinking to myself like,
that could be you.
I could do that.
Yeah.
I could do like. Do you remember what's his face? He pitched for the Phillies till he was like 56 years old. He was a lefty, broke maybe 83, and could barely crack a pane of glass with a fastball. This was probably like 10 years ago. But anyway, I used to watch him and just get so angry, right? Like it was so hard not to project my own failed accomplishments onto him,
Right.
where it's just like.
But his finesse was so good that's why he was there.
Well, he was also 50. He came into the league in fucking 1947. You know, it's like.
It's right.
At different times, bro.
You're right. It's because of the removal aspect. Like when you have a relationship to it, you then see yourself in those shoes.
Jamie Moyer, yes.
You see yourself in those positions. Like that could be me. Like there's a version of me that gets there because I see it right in front of me.
Yes, like something about Jamie Moyer allowed him to be Jamie Moyer, and something about me allowed me not to be Jamie Moyer.
Right.
And
Because
it's very difficult not to project that out and just be like, fuck that guy.
Yeah.
Like it's weird because you would think that the opposite would happen, where I would look at him and be like, we're the same. Like, I want to root for this guy. No, exact opposite. It was just like sheer jealousy and envy, where it's like, this guy throws 85. I throw 85. We're both left-handed.
What's the difference?
What's the difference here?
What's different?
Right? Yeah. What is different? And I think that, you know, to Landon's point, that does happen far too often in poker because now the skill is so less noticeable.
Right.
Right. It's so more difficult to identify exactly how people are making money and what makes them above average or elite. It's all thought process, right? So if you're not having deep intellectual conversations with them, it's very easy to just judge a book by its cover and say like, this asshole got a lucky opportunity and got to cash in on it, and that asshole should have been me.
Right.
Right. And that's very unfair to anybody who's willing to stick their neck out and be in the public sphere,
Well, I think that also, and I've even gotten this from being on this podcast where people are like, you wouldn't be on there if you weren't a woman. Like the only reason you're on there is because of the way you look or because you're a woman. And that's like, you know, 1 in every like 200 people that say that. But that, I think that maybe is part of where that comes from.
Yeah. I understand what you're saying. Like you're filling a quota.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, the irony is that you being a woman only makes your humor grosser and harder to laugh at. So, if anything,
If you can't
like,
tell, I like to make people squirm.
right. Yeah. It's like your cringe level actually is significantly higher.
Yeah.
But
Definitely one of a kind.
yeah, no, I mean, like that's always going to be the case where we feel like there are these unspoken quotas that need to be met in order to fulfill some sort of like societal obligation or like progressive movement or whatever the case may be. And you know, some of this is born out of us living through a day and age where affirmative action was like just a major talking point in the political realm for decades. And you know, it did some heavy lifting and it probably did some harm as well along the way. And it's tough as human beings to look at the nuance of stuff like that and try to determine like success or failure. We just want things to be very black and white.
Yep.
And you know, to Melissa's point, it's very easy to project whatever bias you may have, whether it be championing for her because she's a woman and has an opportunity, or tearing her down because you feel like that opportunity is only born out of the fact that she's a woman. I don't know that there's a solution to that other than constantly shining a light on it and speaking about it whenever the opportunity arises. And it's unfortunate for Melissa because like I don't know what that's like. I know to a lesser degree where it's like people think I'm a shit reg who got an opportunity in a spot that I didn't deserve.
Yeah.
But it's not the same.
Can they go back to thinking you're bad at poker?
I would love that, man.
Please, man.
Get dog pork out of fucking retirement. You know what? I'll keep talking about Doug's rug. You keep talking about how I'm incompetent at the table, and we'll both benefit. Yeah. Somehow, some way, we'll both come out on top on
He's
this.
really bad. He's
I
really
mean,
bad
to that point, I think that it's a double-edged sword because as a woman, I know that just statistically amongst the field of, poker players, I stand out more. Like I can leverage that to try and build a brand or,
sure,
set myself up for opportunities in the future. Like it's easier to be noticed when you stick out. There's negatives that come with that because you stick out.
Right.
So it's sort of.
And I think with this scenario with Ebony, I think that's what was that's what's really unfortunate. Why if I were in her situation, I would probably feel a little bit extra hurt and a little bit down on the whole situation as a whole, because not only is she unique just in her sheer presentation of being a woman in a male-dominated field, being a minority in a largely whitewashed field, but she did something that was actually unique, right? Like the uniqueness of this is not her skin color or her gender. It's her standing in the community and like being somebody who is on the outside looking in to that sort of arena. And I want to frame it that way specifically because it's not like she's a nobody. It's not like she's not a good poker player or doesn't have any skill.
Right.
It's just that she's not a high roller.
Yeah.
And like few of us are. So it's easy to be on the outside looking in, kind of with your nose on the glass saying like, if I work hard enough or if I get an opportunity, I hope I can compete kind of thing.
Right.
And that's legitimately what happened. Like not only was she playing with the best of the best, complete elite competition across the board, but she's playing for money that just the buy-in alone would probably be career altering. Maybe not life-changing, maybe not career-changing, but if she had just been given the $200K instead of a seat, that in and of itself might have been a big enough opportunity to like really alter her path in this game moving forward, right? So she's playing 20x the stakes of what she usually plays for an amount of money that if she could just cash out now, it's kind of like that whole when you first get into poker and you're talking to your parents about it and you're like in a tournament that's a little bit too big for you or whatever, you're like, I'm chip leader with X amount of chips. So they're like, just cash out now. Right. And it's like, yeah, that's not an option. We're here for the long haul, right? So like there's that mental aspect that she had to overcome. There's so many mitigating factors that make this run so much more notable than anybody else doing it outside of like somebody else in her shoes, right? Because even an amateur businessman doing it, he doesn't have the money factor weighing on him.
Right.
He doesn't have the aspect of like how career altering or life changing.
He wins or loses it. He goes back to living his normal life.
Right. He has the struggles of strategy, right? Like he has to fill in the gaps where he lacks strategy and things of that nature. He lacks confidence in his decision making, whatever the case may be. Yeah. But imagine that taking place still when you know what the right answer is, but all these other mitigating factors are weighing in on you.
Right. There's definitely I'm sure there is some sort of like financial ideas running in the background of like, I know I should bluff catch sometimes, but this is such a big spot. This is a one-off moment. Like, do I mix a call? Do I find a fold? Like, do I run this bluff in some spots?
Yep.
Where you just, as a human, these things are naturally going to exist when you're effectively playing outside of your means in the best way possible.
She highlighted two of those spots. She said in the 25K, she checked down 5 high in a spot where she was positive it was a bluff, but was just scared.
Yeah.
And then later,
that's like respectable. Like,
yeah. And then later in the 200K, she basically had a decision for her tournament life for Sean Perry with a middle pair bluff catcher.
Yeah.
And it took her 5 time banks before she could arrive to the correct decision, but she got there. Right.
Called?
Yeah.
And she was right.
And she was right.
Let's fucking go, dude.
Yeah. So it's like that's one of those situations where it's very easy in hindsight to have just misstepped and said, like, I'll look for a better opportunity.
Yeah.
It's also easy for us looking at the results of the overall tournament and seeing 5th for 1.7 and not knowing these details.
Yeah,
Right?
right.
Because
Yeah.
we only see the end result. We don't see the tournament take place in its purest form for her unless she tells us that. Like, I didn't know that was part of what happened until just hearing about it now. And that means a lot because when you just see a number, it just dilutes the entire experience.
For sure.
Right? And because we're not the ones playing it. But every big score that we've had, I'm sure there have been hands or situations from that tournament that will stick with you and you'll remember for the rest of your life.
Yeah, and I think that was the intention of this interview between her and Ingram, right?
Right. It should have been like that.
I'm sure that it was.
Right.
Like I don't want to assign malice to Joey where
Yeah, of
I don't
course.
think it exists. Like, they're longtime friends.
Yeah.
I'm very, very certain that at his core he was extremely happy for his friend.
100%.
And that came off in the early portions of the interview. The problem is that well, there's two things that happen. So first, this is not a problem. This is a positive. Ebony, as I know her, is authentically herself. There's no questioning like who Ebony is, what she stands for, what she represents.
Yeah.
What is her viewpoint on a lot of things. Like, now, of course, there's a lot of nuance there that may not be understood if you just see her on social media or brush into her at a tournament or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
But she's very unapologetically herself. And she spoke to a lot of this in detail throughout the interview, which I thought she did a really great job of articulating, speaking about how, she's kind of grown up in the game and how 10 years ago she wouldn't have been prepared for this opportunity and how, in the past she had contributed to some of the things that she rallies against now.
Yeah.
And I think all of those are very character defining things to highlight and do a great job of letting us in on the like notion of like who she is, what she stands for, and why we should care.
Right.
The problem then becomes that there are a lot of underpinnings to this story that aren't necessarily highlights, right? There's a lot of things that could potentially go unspoken, but aren't unconsidered by the audience, right? And the beginning of this is that Ebony is authentically I don't know if feminist is the right term. Like, I don't know if she wants labels or not, but like she's very authentically championing for women, right? She's advocating for women in general, but specifically in poker, right? And it's impossible to ignore the fact that Phil Nagy gave her this opportunity, who is viewed very negatively within this space. So now that we've kind of pick this interview apart for the good things that it is, or that it was, we can't really avoid the conversation of where this all went wrong. And I think it starts by just, first looking at what the response was post-interview by Ebony, because anybody who watched saw that last 30 minutes went off the tracks, like very, very clearly, right? It was two different tones from the first 2 hours to the final 30. And again, like, it's very critical to understand that like these are two friends that are talking in a public sphere, right? So there is some nuance to that where perhaps it was getting a little charged at times, but like that's just the way that they speak to people. They or speak to each other. They kind of forget that the mics are on, that type of stuff. It happens all the time with us here on set, right? But I felt what she felt, not for the same reasons, but I felt what she felt when she just ended the interview. I've been in that spot. I've been in that spot enough with you guys where
You did it last week, I think.
I tried.
He told us, I think I feel that way 20% of the time. And I was like, we got to get those numbers up.
I don't think she realizes that 20% is one show a week. That means once a week.
Those are rookie numbers, guys. We could do better than that.
To end it all.
But yeah, like,
let's not ruin our friend's mental sanity.
It's very difficult with an open forum and open mics like this to have an emotionally charged conversation in any way, shape, or form without really stringent framework. And that's why we were late today. Like, we put a lot of prep time into this because I wanted to ensure today wasn't one of the 5 times that I want to just like walk off set, right? So I viscerally felt what she felt. I know what it's like to be boiling over that much, and also be like looking your friend in the face saying like, how did you get me here? Yeah. You know, like I thought we were on the same team here. Right. So her thread, I thought, did a good job of articulating like where that raw emotion was coming from, and why it may have been a little bit unnecessary. So I think that this will frame a lot of what we talk about moving forward. So I'm going to briefly go through the thread. It leads with, to say I was disappointed would be an understatement. After a wonderfully exhausting week, this is not how I thought I would be celebrating. Alas, here we are, and I have some thoughts for you, Joe Ingram. So she starts, number 1, the idea that women have to answer for men at all times is ridiculous double standard, demanding women to do the emotional labor on for the behavior of men. Number 2, me asking your community to stop calling women bitches isn't censorship. Intention matters. Number 3, when men get loud, they're fired up. When black women do it, they're angry and have a temper. Number 4, when you allow your community to attack your guest supposed friend, you are co-creating toxic behavior. Number 5, when I see bad behavior, I call it out all the time, not just when it's convenient. I go hard in the paint for anybody being mistreated, both publicly and privately. And there are multiple people who can vouch for that. Not only am I active on the front lines, I'm working diligently behind the scenes to create a positive and long-standing impact. Although it felt less severe when I found out the mod who used the word bitch was a woman, again, I say intention matters. Using the word bitch for woman in a negative way in a male-dominated space only harms women. It perpetuates the negativity attached to the use of the word amongst an already extremely toxic chat environment. Number 7, this is just her basically framing out how you can say the word bitch positively versus negatively. Whatever. I'm not going to do it justice. I'm not going to read it.
We really want to hear that.
Number 8.
Please.
You go for it. Number 8, going in on somebody so hard, asking them to explain the actions of another person while glazing over a guest accused of cheating, and a friend shilling a crypto site that fuck people over is not only bad optics, it's shit behavior. So that kind of ties back into number 1 a little bit, but also now kind of calls Joey's character into question a little bit with regard to the Bring Kenny interview and not calling out Doug for the crypto rug. Number 9, rejecting progress, growth, and new ideas is exhausting. I don't know how some of you do it. Number 10, if treating people well and wanting to be treated well in return is considered being woke, then I'm woke as fuck. Lead with love and own your shit. I think comprehensively this list is very good. It's a lot of like what we have framed out to talk about today in today's show. I do think some of it had like, it's clear there's emotion injected there. You know, kind of like the calling him out for the Bring Kenny interview and the Doug rug. It's fine. It's fine, but it's also exactly what was happening. You're asking him to now answer for other people the same way you were kind of positioned to answer for other people. So I think that like overall her thoughts come across very well, and it's understandable like where the hurt comes from, like why she's upset, and all things that align with that. Like again, you know, this was supposed to be her victory lap. So to even have to come up with that thread thereafter just shows how far off the rails we went. And you know, it was a mere 30-minute discussion that derailed potentially 2.5 hours of something that was pretty reasonable. Yeah. So I want to get a little bit deeper into framing out what I consider to be where this conversation went awry, if you will. First and foremost, I kind of already referenced this, but the Nagy element to this story is impossible to ignore, right? There's really nothing we can do to separate Ebony from Nagy at this point, just due to the fact that not only does she rep his brand, but he was both the benefactor of her deep run as well as the financier. And all of those things, I want to be very clear up front. All of those things are fine. Get your bag.
Yeah. No
one is judging Ebony, or at least nobody should be judging Ebony for in any way, shape, or form capitalizing on this opportunity.
Right.
You know, I don't know if like Mormon or Katie Lindsay were offered the same opportunity, but if they were, there is absolutely 0% chance anybody or Guru or any of the other ACR pros, there's no fucking way anyone outside of just like kind of hating on the fact that it's not them would ever be like, oh, that's blood money. Like you can't do that, right? Yeah. Like there's a big difference between I think there's a big difference between benefiting off of the product that is aligned with somebody who may be shitty versus benefiting directly off of somebody who's shitty and then supporting them, right? So I don't think her accepting this buy-in, I don't think her representing this site by any stretch of the imagination is like an advocacy for Nagy, right? Like I don't think that somehow leads to her championing for someone that the community at large has dismissed as not great. Right.
The opportunity itself is isolated.
Yes. So I think that's very important to lay out. But with that said, if we can't really ignore the Nagy aspect to all this, it's very delicate how it gets interjected then into the conversation. Because if what happened, so a couple of times throughout the interview, Joey kind of pressed on her a little bit and said, well, I know you to be this advocate for women. What about the fact that Nagy is just like, accused by multiple women in the community of sexual harassment type of stuff? When you press in that specific way, what it does is it now forces Ebony to defend her viewpoints on the state of affairs for women in poker. Right. So it really corners her into having to defend herself for being an advocate of a cause that she believes in. And now it's all somehow tied back to Nagy. So I think that like that in and of itself is going to create a defensive posturing and is going to obviously allow emotions to boil over and like really take things off the rails a bit.
Yeah. It's reductive.
Yes. It doesn't mean to be, but it forces itself to be.
It slowly turns into that.
Yes. So corollary to that is Joey introducing the D-Negs drama, right? This really is what got the ball rolling on things just absolutely derailing. And I see a few issues with this, right? So up until that point, I thought Ebony had addressed the Nagy stuff pretty well and kind of moved past it, right? Like, sure, maybe as an audience, we would like to hear her thoughts more on his past transgressions, what it feels like to represent a site led by a man like that whenever you're so in the corner of women, whatever. But she doesn't owe us that, right?
Absolutely not.
She doesn't owe us that. And though we may have an appetite for it, it's not critical to this interview in any way, shape, or form. Like this is a victory lap. Let's keep the eye on the prize, like keep your eye on the ball type of thing, right? But what ends up like kind of really derailing it is Joey introduces the D-Negs drama, where previously this year Ebony had kind of like publicly called D-Negs out for an incident back in 2008 or 2009 in Foxwoods. And the problem with this being brought up is that it personifies this bigger unspoken conversation of what is Ebony's stance as a whole on the current state of affairs for women in poker. And then the nuance that trickles down from there, right? So beyond what your stance is, how can we as a community at large kind of rally together and help things move in a positive direction? Or maybe not getting to the point of naming names, but like for those that the community deems to be out of line or talking out of pocket, how can we better converse with them in their platform? Why are you laughing?
No, it's out of pocket's funny.
Okay.
Yeah.
I
was thinking too much.
Go your side.
Definitely got to go my side here.
So it becomes like, how can we have a bigger conversation with them as a whole, right? Unfortunately, like what ends up happening is by this being brought up, it's very personal to her. It's anecdotal to her. And what it does is it now personifies the problem that's not being spoken about, which is misogyny in poker, right? So now it puts a face to it. And it's one of the biggest platforms in our community. So it puts Daniel on blast specifically, right? And the issue there is that it's emotionally charged because again, it's personal to Ebony. It's anecdotal to Ebony. And that's not to say that Daniel isn't at fault, and it's not to say that Daniel doesn't have other incidents where he may have made other people feel uncomfortable. It's just that Ebony is the one with the mic right now, and it's a call out of Daniel, right? Now, she was led this way by Joey, the interviewer, which, again, I believe to be a problem, but, emotion gets invoked here. It's impossible for it not to, right?
Right.
And once that happens, now it's absolutely impossible to ignore Nagy's role in all of this in the community, right? Now, there is no way we exit this conversation without Joey asking the unasked question of, what about Nagy, right? Mm-hmm. And as a viewer and as a peer, I'm watching this and, I want him to follow up. Now, he doesn't have to listen to me in the chat, but like, I'm pressing too. I'm in the chat saying like, okay, you have all these issues with Daniel and that's totally fine. This is potentially an incident that's worth calling out. But how are we not hearing your voice then about Nagy? And I can understand that she's coming from the vantage point of like, look, you guys don't see what's going on behind closed doors. I'm advocating hard for women with Nagy. I'm in his ear. There is change taking place at a higher level behind closed doors. But the problem is that like, if that's true, that needs to be communicated in some capacity. Like there needs to be some good faith there where she is, and I know that's not fair. It's not fair to put the responsibility on her to make Nagy look better to the public, right?
Yeah,
that's
she's not his
her
PR
job.
rep.
Right, she's not his PR rep, and that's certainly...
She shouldn't even be in that position. The fact that she even has to check her own boss to tell him to stop sexually harassing is fucking ridiculous. But I don't like this topic, so I'm gonna stay quiet.
No. I think your point is valid, and I want to loop back to that.
Yeah.
I just want to kind of like lay out the groundwork for everything that's out there. So I want to be fair to all parties involved because I think this topic is incredibly nuanced and it's not as simple as like, oh, you fucked up here and you fucked up there. It's not that. It's literally objectively what happened, right? When D-Negs gets brought up, Nagy is going to get brought up. The same way whenever this happened with Vanessa, when Blazarian got brought up, Nagy's going to get brought up. Like it's just inevitable. You're always, as a community, we're always going to ask for the spectrum as a whole, right? Like, yes, you have every right to call out these incidences as they happen, but we, as the public, who are less in the know, who are less in the thick of things, who are less on the front lines, also want to know where we are supposed to stand with regard to these others, because all we can follow are actions and words, right? And so when there's a lack of words, we have to look at actions. And to an ignorant observer who doesn't know Ebony at all, who doesn't know all the work that she's putting in behind the scenes, who doesn't really know anything outside of like what they see on Twitter and things of that nature, it looks as though she's standing with him and advocating or rallying against Daniel, right? Like that's the optics of it.
Yeah. That
may not necessarily be what's happening, but that's the sheer optics. And that's why I think this whole conversation should have just been avoided, right? So now once that happens, the chat becomes organic. Like it actually grows into a third guest of the stream, if you will, or a second guest of the stream, and it becomes a focal point to pretty much both parties involved.
Yeah, the snowball grows.
Right, and like obviously that becomes a very negative free roll for both Joey and for Ebony, because we're already at like an emotional apex. We're already into a conversation that should not be a part of a victory lap, and we're already now, especially if like neither one of them were really prepped for this, the language and the framing of all this stuff is going to matter so much, right? So if Joey missteps at all with his words, which I'm sure admittedly he would say he did, it's going to cause a specific reaction out of Ebony. Right. And vice versa, right? And what ended up occurring is now the chat kind of became the angry mob, and it resulted in two emotional back and forths between Ebony and Joey, where as things are boiling over, Joey kind of got a little bit reductive and, you know, kind of became a bit dismissive of Ebony, and was kind of like almost...
There's a little bit of a mocking tone at some point.
It was like soft trolling.
Yeah.
Right? And it's like, they're friends, so like I'm not sure where the line lies for that, but as an observer, I understood where, like, I felt that visceral reaction of like, what the fuck, man?
Right, especially when it comes to like the chat, like you give an inch, she'll take a mile.
Yes.
Right? Like as soon as you start adding in the trolling and such, which is fine if you guys can kind of keep that between you two, but the chat is just not something that you're going to be able to control fully.
Right.
And will be fed into hard.
Also, I just think like, this wasn't supposed to be a tough interview. Like,
no.
This is supposed to be a softball thing. So it's like, what really came across to me is that he's unsympathetic to how volatile the situation became. Mm-hmm. And in that particular moment, now she doesn't have a friend across from her. She has an adversary. Right. And that's not great, right? Like he kind
of becomes a personification of the chat.
Yes, exactly. Right. And now, and I think we saw that, right? There was like a little bit of projecting both ways that was taking place, where he's getting very defensive of the chat and she's getting very aggro towards the chat. And, whether it was a miscommunication or not, there was this aspect of one of his female moderators saying something along the line of, when are women going to stop being bitches and supporting one another? And I think just seeing the word bitches was enough to
set it off.
Right, really set it off, even though if that wasn't necessarily the message, right? Like if she had the full context of this is a woman utilizing the word in maybe not a great way, but like
right.
it wasn't meant in the standard derogatory way. It seemed like it was a representation of the word coward, which again, maybe that's also just like crossing a line, but it was enough in a highly volatile situation to like really just pop things off the hinges.
It was
right?
a poor connotation of the word, yeah.
Yeah, definitely poor word choice. And she apologized very quickly in the chat, but that was obviously very glossed over. It had to be at that point, the fight had ensued.
Right, like the bull saw the red,
Yeah.
It's on. It's just on.
So with all of that kind of framed out a little bit, I want to reframe this conversation. I want to take this conversation away from gender and misogyny a little bit, because I don't think that it's our job as a reaction podcast here,
right,
to kind of insert. Like, I think what it is that I want to have an opinion on this, and I think we all want to have an opinion on this. We all do have an opinion on this, but I don't want it to get wrapped up into the like social dynamic of gender roles, misogyny, all of these things that we're constantly battling, because I think we're all on the same team.
Right.
We're all in favor of being more inclusive, uplifting women as much as possible, uplifting minorities as much as possible. We're all in that camp.
Yeah.
Where I think this conversation is better steered towards is the use of a public platform as a whole, because in this particular instance, the chat was given a public platform. And Joey has a very large public platform that he's allowing Ebony to leverage, and Ebony already has a public platform of their own. So I think that it's really critical to like kind of outline the ups and downs of these platforms and the responsibilities that come with them, and how we can just do better as a whole with these types of conversations moving forward.
Yeah.
So I think the first thing that is important to understand is that, and obviously, this is a lesson that I'm kind of learning the hard way with some tough combos myself, where it's very important to be thoughtful when on social media or on the mic and you have a large audience watching.
Or just an audience, right? It gets amplified because it's large, but what you say still holds weight whether or not it's a large.
It does, but the difference is when I'm speaking to 7 people in a room that I'm close with.
Sure,
I don't need to be so particular with curating my message.
Right. I just meant in a public platform. Like if you reach 50 people or 5,000, like still be careful. Like there's a critical mass.
Yes and no, but I'm not even talking about carefulness, right? I'm talking about thoughtfulness, right?
Okay.
So you could say the same message 2 different ways, and the difference is that at a critical mass, you're going to be offered far less grace and far less room for maneuverability with your words, right? So kind of what I'm saying is, like, as the audience gets large, it's very important that you've put real thought into curating a message that's clear, concise, and well thought out to a degree that there isn't going to be easy misunderstandings, or misrepresentations of what you mean.
You want to reduce as much nuance as possible.
Yeah. So this happened with me with the commentary thing, where somebody replied a comment on the thing and said something to the effect of, I watch all the Hustler streams. The reason that they're crushing is because their table talk is the best, period. And then it said something to the effect of, if you polled an audience and asked them if they would rather mute the commentary or mute the table talk, they would all choose to mute the commentary. And I said, that's because it largely stinks. But what I meant, how I read that was two separate thoughts.
Yeah.
Hustler is great. And then secondary to that, amongst all live streams, if given the opportunity to listen to table talk or commentary, people would choose the table talk. And I was just judging commentary on the aggregate, saying it stinks.
Yeah.
And on the aggregate, it probably does. That wasn't a slight at Hustler. That wasn't a slight at Nick or Ali or a lot of these other people that I think are great at what they do.
Right.
It's a slight at the people that I think are just given a mic without much credential, right? But I wasn't thoughtful about that.
No,
I
you
didn't
just
take
wrote the
any
first
time.
thing,
I didn't take any time to curate a message there. I read something one time, didn't bother to try to decipher if those two sentences were meant to be collective or if they were separate to one another, and I responded.
Yeah.
And because of that, it was misunderstood, it was taken the wrong way, and it created a lot of backlash. And I deserve that because I spoke openly in a public forum without curating much thought into what I was doing.
Right.
So like I said, you learn some of these things the hard way. The good news is that like I'm friendly with the people who took offense, and hopefully they know me well enough to know it wasn't directed at them.
Yeah.
But even if they don't, this is fixable with an apology, and this isn't attacking anybody's character. It's not like tearing anybody down. It's much more critical whenever we start to get into these social politics, right? Because now character does come into play, integrity comes into play, call out culture comes into play, and all these other things. So the other element of that is, if you don't want the conversation to be scrutinized publicly, have it privately. This is, again, something that like I'm very much learning the hard way. There's a lot of times where, even just talking with friends, I can think of times where we're replying back and forth through a tweet thread, and I know that they mean no harm, and I'm sure they know that I mean no harm, but the tone that we're taking with each other is a bit contentious. Right? So when that happens, the onlookers see a fight and begin to choose sides. And now they pile in. Right? They pile in based off their sides. So when you're publicly calling people out in an instance where you're just trying to draw attention to the larger conversation at hand, right? There's misogyny in poker, for instance, but you now publicly call out a single individual. Just know that call out is going to be now a division of the platform that you're speaking on. And it's more probable that you're going to get a defensive response than an open-minded one, right? So these fall very much under, as a public persona, as somebody with a platform, we are responsible for how we choose to strategize and utilize these platforms for our benefit or for our downfall.
Right. You gotta think about what you post and try to remove as much nuance as possible. You just have to be careful.
Yeah.
People misconstrue things whenever they want to find a way to get you.
I can speak to the lack of strategizing. I definitely don't strategize, and I speak off the cuff a lot, and I have gotten corrected for that, rightfully so. I can be I can be a little much sometimes, and I know that. But yeah, I think that having this platform where sometimes I forget that there's a bunch of people listening.
Sure.
And it's like, just feel like I'm ranting to you guys, and it's like, that's not the case. And what I say has implications, and I need to like be mindful of that. Yeah.
So the solution would just be to be more cautious. And have the conscience.
Because I know when I'm running over the line, and I know when I'm tearing the finish line open, and I'm throwing it and I'm burning it down, and I'm just like, I don't care, whatever. Yeah. But next time, I can look at that line and say, all right, detour. I'm gonna say it in a nice way. Just kidding. I'll just not say. I'll just not do that. And I think that there's a lot more strategizing, not just to avoid getting myself into trouble, but to actually grow and build stuff. I think more strategizing is good overall.
I think we convince ourselves that if we spend the time curating a message, and that comes with some level of filtering, that somehow we're being inauthentic to ourselves.
Yeah.
But that's not true. Like, words just matter. and choosing the less inflammatory word or choosing the less emotionally charged word is not being inauthentic. It's being thoughtful of the other person or of your audience as a whole.
Yeah, and it's people only see, you know, a certain window. Like they don't see me 24 hours of the day. So if that's filling up a decent portion of my window, then I'm not advertising myself correctly anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a difference between having a visceral reaction and words to things when you have an instant opinion versus understanding those feelings, and then instead of just being, call it authentically yourself, finding ways to find the main core point of your sentiment and then relaying that in a proper way.
Well, part of it is that I find it funny to rant and be vulgar, and it is, but there's a line.
It just depends. The line is the target.
Yes.
Yeah. When you're just speaking into the void, or it doesn't have a personification to it, it's generally going to be fine. Right. It's when you, like, I talk about shit regs all the time. Yeah. It's up to you to decide if you fall into the category.
Yeah. That's
and
true.
if you do, then you chose to be offended.
I mean,
right?
Conrad and I are offended, but
and that's fine. That's your choice.
I'm not offended.
You know?
No, we're proud. We're proud.
Yeah.
But like that's like kind of the differentiator between me actually saying like Conrad is a shit reg, right? Because now it's like strictly calling him out, and he has to be defensive, even if he does think that he's ultimately.
Go fuck yourself, man.
Rightfully so. So along those lines, I think that when we look at this a little bit closer and we start to dissect the interviewer versus interviewee type dynamic, there's a huge responsibility to Joey as the host to create and respect boundaries during the interview. And what I mean by that is like some level of prep needs to go in as far as like, what are you willing to talk about? What are you not willing to talk about? Where's the line? Like, what are my boundaries with you? And then vice versa. Here are my boundaries for my program. Like, I think you're overstepping if you use my platform to do A, B, or C, like to air a personal attack or whatever the case may be, right? Like it goes both ways. It's his platform. He is the one with the larger megaphone in this instance. He's providing the audience. Right. So it's important that he's respected as the host, but it's also doubly important that he is.
It's a two-way street.
Yes, that he's extending that same courtesy to his guests at all time. Right. And obviously there were points in this interview where Ebony didn't feel that. Right. And that's super problematic. I think to that end, like nobody should ever be caught off guard with a line of questioning, right? Or feel ambushed in any way, shape, or form.
Yep. Yeah. Especially when it can lead to an insight of an ambush for content, right? Like you don't want to get gotcha'd by your friends, right? And that sometimes just happens by having a conversation. It's just a matter of being cognizant enough and realizing the situation in order to not have that happen, because now you turn into the enemy of the person that you're trying to give a platform to.
Right. And I think like to that end, he also has a huge responsibility to himself and his audience to address what's going unsaid. So when a topic becomes like too dialed in or too nuanced, and there are clear follow-up questions that speak to a broader conversation at hand, he absolutely has to take it there. Yeah. Now, I think that the guest has every right to opt out. Right? Like if you don't want, like Ebony did a great job of this. He kind of pressed her a little bit of like, how much did you take away from the 1.9? Yeah. And she was just like, that's none of your business. Yeah. I don't want to talk about it. Nobody asked Fedor how big of a piece he has, yada, yada, yada. And like, whether that's true or not, it's absolutely her right to opt out and not divulge that information.
100%. So
I think that the same thing happens. And that's a great way to de-escalate a situation, right? Like if it's clearly getting anecdotal in nature and a little bit emotional, and he tries to bring it back to the broad spectrum or the generic case, and she arrives at like, actually, I just don't want to talk about this. Yeah. Right. Great. We've managed to avoid what could have been a very negative spiral into the end all of this podcast and possibly a relationship as a whole.
Right. You're allowed to not talk about something if you don't want to. And in some regards, if you're going to have a conversation or a long form public discussion, it probably is best to have a breakdown of the things that you want to talk about and bring up in order to maybe avert these situations in the future.
Yeah, and I mean, even at a minimum, I think that when you go on, you understand what the underlying talking points are and whether or not you want to discuss them. Yeah. So I think that anytime that you may lead with a little bit of nuance or personal experience, it's very critical to be prepared to tie it to a bigger conversation. And it's important to be able to anticipate those follow-ups, even if it wasn't pre-discussed, because if you're uncomfortable with those follow-ups, then maybe it wasn't the best idea to bring this up on the platform to begin with, right? Because there is a mutual responsibility for both guest and host.
Right, because in this certain situation, it turned into a victory lap to then moving to a different
like a gotcha
place. Yeah, it moved to a different place. And she wasn't trying to take it there, but then when it gets to that point and you have that natural human instinct to want to defend yourself, and it's completely understandable, it then can become something that it wasn't supposed to be in the first place.
So I want to, now that we've kind of laid that out, I've done a lot of the talking. I want to hear more from you guys. I want to like ask some very specific questions that, you know, we've kind of already touched upon, but I want to like flesh them out a bit. So first and foremost, you know, the number one point in Ebony's tweet was that it's a rigid double standard in this industry for women to answer for men's transgressions. And she felt like she was attacked by having to address the Nagy situation at all. I personally think that it was kind of a byproduct of, you know, calling out Daniel in some regards. And again, I'm very hesitant with how I use that because I don't want to undermine Ebony's point, right? Like, if she believes what transpired between her and Daniel is a bad thing that's worthy of calling out, she has every right to do that, right? It's very difficult for me personally to see where the separation lies between Daniel and Nagy in this instance. And I guess that's the larger question I have for you is, well, actually, no, we'll lead with that. How do we separate someone who is advocating for women as a whole from like having to disengage themselves from somebody who may be a root cause problem? So in other words, like, how do we amplify their messages without holding them accountable for the transgressions of the person that they may align themselves with?
Yeah. It's a tough one. I think, you know, I had my own personal experiences with Nagy, which is why I am biased on this. And I think that, honestly, just speaking from my point of view, it's hard for me to listen when someone is saying like they want all women to feel safe and they are building their brand off, you know, promoting women and everything. And I don't feel safe with someone who's going to defend him to me if I were to bring something up, which has happened. So I'm just like, sort of, it's hard for me to reconcile those two things. And I think that they can exist, but just my personal experiences, and, you know, maybe I have some work to do on settling that internally, but it's hard for me to accept both as existing in the same at the same time without it being hypocritical. So it's just, I don't think that she should have to give up any opportunities. I don't blame her for taking, I mean, it's an amazing opportunity. She did an amazing job. She nearly broke a record for women. It's fucking awesome. But it's more, that's not the part that I, you know, felt a certain way towards. It was more just the statement of people who are complicit with DNEGs are the problem with why women won't play poker, and then also saying like, I want all women to feel safe, and then in the same breath saying, you know, Nagy's great, just met him but he put me into this tournament.
So I want to not push back, but I want to follow up with that. How can Ebony, in a spot like she's in, how can she separate herself from Nagy in a meaningful way? So in other words, how can she speak out against actions like Daniel without having to defend, apologize for, or even address the Nagy thing as a whole? Right? So like, how can we hold Nagy accountable instead of Ebony?
Right. Well,
the problem is that, I'm sorry to cut you
no,
off.
go ahead, because I actually don't know.
Yeah, so it's my answer to the first question. I think that there was no going around asking about Nagy after she brought up Daniel.
Right.
There's just no going around it. You can't throw stones when you live in a glass house. And I hate to say that like in that type of tone, but like that's what it is.
Well,
It has nothing to do with.
But it's indirectly. Like,
it is.
Well,
It
I
is
just want to be
indirect.
clear on your analogy because she's not the one living in the glass house. Nagy is.
Yes, but at the same time, she's underneath that umbrella.
Well, he's using her for his own image repair.
He is.
That's the thing.
He is for sure. But what I'm saying is that, and this contradiction comes up a lot. So that's why I'm really trying to have an open discussion about it, because I think it's challenging. We all are in agreement that she should never turn down a bag from somebody who is a potentially bad actor in this space, right?
Maybe the framing of how Joey brought it up should have been different.
I think that's true.
Right. So it's like, because it's like, it's framed in a way of whataboutism.
Yes.
Right. And that's never a good thing. That never like leads to a good conclusion.
Right.
Right. So now she's put in this position where it's like, well, I do want to help women and make them feel safe, but now I have to try to defend this situation that I'm in, that we all agree that she should have accepted.
I
right?
like that.
Right. So that's it. So it's she's just put in such a tough spot when it's framed the way it was.
Let me follow up real quick on it. Hold on.
Go.
So I like that a lot for a few reasons. Number one, it puts the responsibility on us asking the questions rather than on her as the person answering. And I think that's critical, because the true question is not what are your feelings on Nagy, because that's unfair, right? Like, also it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
The true question is, what are your feelings on this topic as a whole, and how does Nagy fit into that, right? And that framing, that reframing and altering of the language now allows her to speak openly and honestly without just dragging her boss and throwing him under the bus.
Right.
Go ahead, Connor.
Yeah, no, I mean, I guess you're kind of right about the framing there, but I think that, like, Joey kind of has to imply this. Like, he has to spin it. Maybe he has to spin it in different words, but once that is brought up with the Nags, it has to be, the Nagy question has to be asked.
That I also agree with.
Like, there's
so
just no
I think
ifs, ands, and buts about it.
Right. So I think both are complicit in some regard. I think that the larger responsibility falls on Joey, though, because it's his podcast, it's his platform. He's amplifying all of this, right? So if he misses the follow-up question, yeah, we're annoyed as an audience, but life goes on. If he drops the ball on the follow-up question, we end up having what we had yesterday, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I do think that a key part of being a good interviewer is recognizing where that pain point is, which is taking an anecdote about Negreanu and turning it into an anecdote about Nagy, right? So I think you're right. You need to skip the whataboutism and dodge the logical fallacies here, and instead lean heavier into the unspoken larger topic at hand of, okay, so you brought up Daniel and this incident that happened and it made you feel a certain way, and as a woman in poker, you're constantly battling these things. Let's speak at a larger picture at a whole. How has your experience in the game been overall, outside of this isolated incident? As a peer and a viewer from the outside looking in, what about other transgressions that we've seen? And then you can say, for instance, Gigi hiring Dan Bilzerian, Bill Nagy being accused of sexual misconduct or sexual harassment to his workers. How do these isolated incidents play a role into your opinion as an advocate for women?
Right. You take the global approach versus the pinned, just like, okay, you say this, what about this?
Yeah,
Makes sense.
I agree with that. But
That's hard to do in real time.
that's what I was about
for
to say.
sure.
I was going to advocate for Joey here because that's very hard to do in real time.
Oh,
and like,
yeah. No one's saying that, he just like, yeah, of course it's hard to do.
Yeah, and
it's almost like you have to like know the DNEG situation is going to come up before.
Well, he asked the question,
Okay.
right?
didn't realize that.
And I think that I understand your desire to advocate for Joey. We're all in his corner. Like, we love the content he puts out, and we certainly don't want to dampen it.
No, I'm not. I mean, not.
But
I'm just saying in this.
trust
me, I'm like half and half.
I'm not
here.
saying in
I
his
don't-
corner for this
Yeah,
interview. I'm
yeah.
saying in his corner as a content creator.
Yeah.
Like, we want him to succeed.
What you're saying is that
We have to
he-
hold him to a higher standard.
Right, and since he brought up the Negreanu incident, so that if he brought it up, then he should know that the Nagy's coming
yes.
up. So
If
then he
he's
should
a
have been
good
prepared.
interviewer, if he's a good
Right.
interviewer worthy of the
Right.
platform that he's created and wants to continue to grow it moving forward, he absolutely has to be capable of that reframe in real time.
Right.
Otherwise, he has work to do on his skills. Right.
Especially if he knew that he was going to bring up the Negreanu
Right.
thing.
And we see this happening at scale all the time with Rogan, right? He's not a polished professional interviewer. He's gotten a lot better in time, but he still drops the ball here and there. And when he does, he gets absolutely obliterated for it, right?
Yeah.
And that's not to say Joey should be obliterated here, but it might have cost him a friendship. So it's a very hard lesson to learn in that, like, yeah, we fire these mics up 5 days a week. And this definitely all started as like a let's just give this a go kind of thing. I think we could be entertaining type stuff. But the problem is when you're filling content 5 days a week, you can't ignore the big stuff.
Yeah.
You know, earlier this year, Roe v. Wade got passed and we made a collective decision to like just not speak on it, right? It felt a little bit out of my jurisdiction, so to speak. And it was a little bit too touchy of a subject where nobody wanted to speak off the cuff. But
Apollo is here.
Right. Right. So it ended up getting worse, right? Like I wanted to open that pod with me just doing like a 2-minute breakdown of how important this decision was, like maybe the most important court decision we see in our lifetimes. Right. And it was kind of like, maybe this isn't the right idea type of, like there was hesitation behind it, right?
Right.
I was like, okay, well, if there's hesitation in this room, then I'm not going to overstep. Because that hesitation probably projects out to the audience. But what ended up happening was we got a ton of negative feedback instead because DePaulo just trolled Roe v. Wade for the first 15 minutes.
Fucking DePaulo.
It's like, I mean, it's not funny. Like, it truly is a life-altering thing for a lot of people, and I understand wanting to make light of it. But now it's like I was being conservative based off of like potentially overstepping a little bit, and instead we went in the whole other direction where it became a meme.
Yeah.
Right? And that's on me because it's like, you know, as you grow these platforms, if you want the ultimate end goal of being that host that has, you know, hundreds of thousands of viewers or millions of hits on it, whatever, if you want to eventually land on that platform, you can't be loose about it, right? No. We've seen it play out too much in the past. We've seen the Rush Limbaughs rise to fame and then just steer hard into one fucking echo chamber where like they're just terrorists on the internet, basically. We've seen the Alex Jones things play out. Like, and you know, I know I'm using extremists that way, but like it happens on the other side too. And the last thing you want to do is fall victim to the own narrative and reality that you've built in your own head, right? Where, well, this is my stage and the way that I speak is the end all be all and they'll have to adjust to me kind of thing, right? It's very critical to learn these interviewing skills, even if you're not Tom Brokaw, who spent a lifetime trying to polish it, right?
Right.
You don't have to go to journalism school any longer. Like we can sharpen these skills through some education. And I guess like ultimately that's what I'm arriving at is like we need to hold our biggest voices to a higher standard. Well, Doug's a great example, right? With the CoinFlex thing. He's a guy who's outspoken for 5 years about all things negative anytime they came across his desk, be it high rake or cheating or whatever. Like he was the first one to have a bulletin, breaking news, this just in. Doug Polk talks about shit again, right? It's like he was the first one to do it. And then he finds himself on the other side of it and he gets super defensive of like, why aren't you guys giving me grace here? I've always been an advocate for you, yada, yada, yada. And it's like, well, because you're shit at what you do. Yeah. You never tried to get better and you just continually framed things in a way that benefited you and harmed the people that you were attacking. Well, now guess what? You're on the other side of it. You know, you're on the wrong side of an opinion of a Sports Illustrated cover. You're on the wrong side of a shill. And when you're on the wrong side of it, there are going to be other Doug Polks out there to drag you through the fucking mud. And that's exactly what happened. The entire crypto space just ripped him apart on the internet.
Right. It's like a hyenas, you know, like they swarm. Like they just come in. And the big thing there when it comes to improving the platform and like sharpening skills is the aspect of intentionally trying to sharpen. Like the idea of trying to get better as an interviewer.
Correct.
If you want to do more podcasts, trying to get better at podcasts if you want to become a bigger podcast like we're trying to be. And all of these skills take time, effort, and energy. And also realizing that there are going to be mistakes along the way, but we can be as conscious as possible about mitigating those. Yeah.
I think that's for sure true. We touched on a lot of these other questions I've written down, but no, we touched on that. Okay, so the last one I guess I have for you guys collectively is, with all of that being said, do we think that, you know, these more nuanced conversations, like first let me lay a little groundwork. Let's call poker for what it is. It's an eclectic mix of people, or it's at least open to an eclectic mix of people. Maybe it looks a little bit male and whitewashed whenever you look at the actual stats.
Eclectic adjacent.
Sure. Sure. on the on the outer
not that
thirds.
eclectic, but
Well, on the outer thirds of the bell curve,
Yeah.
you'll see a lot of diversity. But yes, across the aggregate, it's not that eclectic. But it's open worldwide. It's certainly eclectic, right? But most importantly, it draws in high intellect, right? Very similar to the chess community. So this is what should be a very knowledgeable community, a very intelligent community, a community very capable of growth and insight. And we already see this, right? We see a lot of people that have been around for a long time wanting to do more. Liv Brie, a great example. She's managed to transition into not just science, but content creation as a whole. She's a mouthpiece for her former community of poker on major platforms like Tim Ferriss. That is the end goal, I think, for a lot of people. Igor, her partner, being another example, like fighting hard for effective altruism and like leaning heavy into that to the point where like he almost had a role with Elon Musk. These are big mountain moving type of things, right? So with all of that groundwork laid, as a community, do we benefit from having these bigger discussions that require a lot of nuance, require a lot of grace and good faith between the people having them? Do we do so in a meaningful way, in a thoughtful way? Or is this largely just like a lot of shouting from whatever team you align yourself to in order to get clicks and more interaction?
Man, there's such like there could be like, you could have the Machiavellian approach of trying to get as much clickers as possible, building your platform as big as possible, and then using that platform for good, right? But who's to say that's the best way to go about it?
Well, when you say for good, elaborate.
it's subjective.
Right. Or at least,
What are you going to do?
Well,
Build,
'cause
build a
that's-
village in Uganda?
Well, I mean, that is the heart of my question, right? Like, a lot of these conversations we're having are philosophical in nature.
yeah.
Do we as a community benefit from attempting to be a little bit more thoughtful, a little bit more willing to engage? Or is it just turning into like a mudslinging contest where, everybody gets positioned to one side or the other?
Yeah.
And if you live long enough, you'll ultimately become the villain.
That's what they say in
That's
Batman.
what they say.
I mean, to some degree, we're seeing this happen with DNegs, right? The more outspoken he is, the more of an asshole
Yeah.
he is to
Yeah.
That's
a
true.
large subsection of the community, right? So I mean, I know that there isn't a clear answer to this, but I pose the question because I think it's a very meaningful one. I'm guilty of this. I engage a lot whenever it comes to topics of conversation. Like I think Melissa asked me yesterday, or it was Landon. He's like, why do you argue with nobody's on the internet about
He's arguing with
diet
an
and
alt
nutrition?
account about fitness or something, which is like the most Berkey thing ever.
But it was like a very simple thing to me where it's like I feel like if even the onlookers are taking anything away from this, it's a good thing because the whole conversation is spurred from I posted a tweet thread that scientifically disproved the myth of cholesterol consumed leading to heart disease. And somebody who, it wasn't an alt account, he's a follower of mine who like is usually pretty graceful in his exchanges with me. And he was in this instance too. He just wholeheartedly took the other side. And I was like, you obviously didn't read the thread. And he's like, too long. And it's like, okay, well,
right. From there, I would not respond to that.
Right. And I mostly disengaged, but like he kept leaning on red meat and then citing a lot of, it's funny, it's always the same article that's cited. It's this like weird BBC article that says like, the title literally says like red meat and processed meats lead to heart disease.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, processed meats lead to heart disease. We agree.
Yeah.
We agree.
Right.
Like what's the conversation here?
Once someone tries to start like pinpointing certain things to play the getcha game, I'm done.
Yeah. So I just said like, let's try a reframe here. Do you think eating a dozen eggs a day will lead to a heart attack? And he says like, if you're overweight, yes. And it's like, okay, please go read the thread. And that's where it ended, right? Like that was the final disengagement and everything. But it's like, that's obviously on a small scale, but let's say that guy was someone else with a 30,000 person platform.
Right.
Like, are these conversations worth having?
Right.
Do they actually bring value to the hundreds of thousands of people who may have saw impressions with that, right?
I see what you're saying, because there are certainly times when you'll respond to something, or even I'll respond to something, and I'll get a message from somebody that's not actively involved in the conversation.
Yeah.
But I'll get a message like through a DM or through a text, like, hey, I've read this and here's my thoughts on these things. And these things are sometimes transformative, right? Because people learn from these discussions. I think it's just a matter in how good of faith the argument's being taken. Because once someone says to you, "Oh man, thread's too long," it's like, okay, what are you trying to do here?
Yeah. You're just trying to bait.
Exactly.
Obviously.
So like, if someone's trying to operate from an actual good faith standpoint instead of trying to play the hold this ratio like kind of mentality, there's positives to it.
I think you bring up a good point there, in the sense of like maybe it's less about the actual conversations taking place, because throughout the history of man, these types of conversations of what led to growth.
Yeah, here we are now.
Right? Like, just philosophy as a whole wouldn't exist if it didn't have value.
Right.
So maybe it's not the actual questions being posed and answered. It's more so a question of like, how do we get to a point where the platform itself, be it podcast, be it Twitter, be it other social media platforms, whatever, how do we get to a point where people are more responsible and we start holding people to a higher bar? Because I think that's ultimately what we're arriving at here. Right? The bar is just too low. It's too easy to fire up a stream. It's too easy to have Twitter fingers.
It's too easy to make an alt account on Twitter and just start roasting someone if you want to.
But how would you police that bar?
You can't.
That's the thing is like anyone can have a platform and say what they want. And this is sort of uncharted territory where this many voices are able to reach the public. Like this, before you had to be a journalist or you had to be a person in media. You had to go through barriers of entry in order to have a voice publicly. Now you can just have one, and that puts a lot of onus on us as readers and as people who digest content of who we're allowing into that and what credibility we're giving that person.
Right. Obviously, it can't be policed, but I do think that there is a certain degree of credit that comes from the Council of Peers, right? So when other large platforms engage with you, be it in a meaningful way or in a distasteful way because they're pushing back hard, that often will signal to the general populace of how much credit or discredit this person deserves.
Right.
The problem is, in my experience, and I think, again, I hate to hammer this, but Polk is the perfect example. People who are interested in growth overall will just utilize that to kind of disqualify anyone that's their peer, anyone that's a competitor, right? And we've seen this from a handful in this community where it's like their natural response to everything is, you're wrong, I'm right, and I'm going to prop myself up.
That's sort of what Ebony was talking about with D-Nags. Like that seems to be what her, like one of her main complaints with him was.
I think she's right. I absolutely think she's right. I think the problem is, and I said this in the beginning but didn't really follow up on it, I think the problem is that the whole incident was brought to his attention because she publicly called him out.
Yeah.
So I do think she has a certain sense of responsibility to deciding to not handle that, to not handle that matter privately. And when that occurs, I don't know what other response would you ever expect?
Right.
Yeah.
You're not going to get a humble, I'm sorry I made you feel that way.
So it's going
to be, what the fuck are you talking about? This is 14 years ago. I don't remember doing that. And you're crazy.
I was going to say, like, that is the issue with trying to publicly suss anecdotal evidence.
Yeah. Especially in a female male dynamic.
Yeah.
Right? Because we absolutely should be believing women when they're claiming 100%. That they're a victim of something.
Yeah.
But it then becomes this issue where it's like, as a guy, how do you handle it, right? Like, because there's so many degrees of accusations.
Yeah.
In this instance, she's just literally like saying something happened, and apology would be more than sufficient, I think, from her vantage point, right? But from his perspective, it's like, well, where there's smoke, there's fire. So if I don't snuff this out right now, the next thing I know, and it did kind of happen, like where he had that weird stalker calling him saying that like he has another family in Arizona. So it's just like
the plot thickens.
Well, I don't know. I think it just disappeared. But I guess my point is that like we do all have to be so much more thoughtful as our public persona grows. And I don't think any of us are trained into this. None of us wish this upon ourselves. I mean, obviously we all benefit from it, and that's why we lean in. But I even notice myself, like the way that I engage, even just in writing with the opposite sex, is very, very well like parsed through.
It's careful
to ensure that like there's no misunderstanding of a sentence or of words. Like it can't be misconstrued as being over sexualized or anything of that. Like flirting via text is hard.
I know.
Now.
Well, and that's
flirting in general is hard. Don't even get me started. Man. Fuck that.
Yeah.
Don't.
We know it. Yeah. Well, that's sort of I talk about this sometimes where it's unfortunate because the people who are extra careful and sort of paranoid about that are not the ones who are the problem. We're talking about the people who are raping and assaulting and crossing boundaries repeatedly. Like, they're not worried about that. They're not having that mental checklist. They're not editing themselves, and they're the problem.
And I think Nagy's like an obvious example of that. Right?
Yeah.
Like whether all of the things he's being accused of were ill-intended by him or just like his inability to communicate in a professional manner doesn't really matter. What matters is that it never crossed his fucking mind
that there's
it was inappropriate.
A power imbalance there, and that, you know, it's more likely to get through because the girl doesn't want to have like opportunities be damaged in the future or anything like that. That just shouldn't be ever a thing. And it's clear that there wasn't a mental checklist or editing process internally there. But a lot of the people who are really scared of, you know, being misinterpreted, like, they're not the issue.
Yeah, there's a lack of how you say, when you are in a position, sometimes it's hard to be on the ball 100% of the time. Like in the Phil situation, like saying the things he said, right? Some things as an individual slip your mind. Other things are completely not allowed.
Right.
Like
out of the realm of normal.
Out of pocket.
Far out of pocket.
Right. Like as far out of the pocket as you can get, you know? And that's sort of like when you have a public platform, when you have a audience, there needs to be more of a conscientious effort from the individual to clarify their statements and leave no nuance. Like, it's so important not to have people misconstrue things, because when you do have that critical mass of X amount of people, there are going to be people that are praying for your downfall.
Yeah, I mean, I would think that it would be especially a diligent checklist for a CEO.
Ahead of a company.
You know, because that's their whole career on the line, but clearly not, because it doesn't really matter.
Well, with power and money comes looseness and the ability to make things go away, I think.
Yeah.
I also think, like, doubling down on that, or maybe building off of that, another thing that we didn't really touch on, but I think is incredibly critical to talk about, is the weight through which we give calling people out. Yeah. Right? So, like, I do think that there is this toxic desire to frame everything as the worst thing that's ever happened, and like look for missteps in anybody with a platform's character, where you can just assassinate them.
Yeah.
And I see it all the time. Obviously, like, I see it for myself. There's like this small collective that is just like trying so desperately to assassinate my character because A, they don't know me in real life, and B, like, I'll say a thing that to them is very triggering.
That's how it always is.
But perhaps to the larger audience as a whole is agnostic, right? Like, if you don't have, and you know, to be fair, like, I also say things that are thoughtless and aren't considerate of my overall audience.
Everyone does sometimes.
Yeah, and like, for sure, you're gonna find me in a gotcha moment, 100%. You'll find everybody in a gotcha moment.
Hundreds of hours of us talking.
Correct.
Like, enjoy.
You will absolutely catch me in a gotcha. I'm here to say it, like, for sure, without any question. It's the context of the gotcha and how egregious it is, right? When you say things that are so bad that there's no walking it back, then you haven't done enough thinking or enough self-reflection to put yourself in a position to actually have a mic 24/7.
Yeah.
But like, when you say things that, you know, could be taken one way or the other, and a certain collective will probably take it for the worst because they think little of you, or they think that you represent a certain aspect of culture that has been poor to them in the past.
Like, how dare you have a microphone in a platform? You're not allowed to do that.
It's more so that they're trying, like, if like, for instance, if as a woman you are just totally off put by Andrew Tate, which you should be for what it's worth, because he's an awful human being, and I say something Andrew Tate adjacent, right? And when I say adjacent, I don't
ATA. Fucking ATA.
When I say adjacent, I don't mean like something that he said that I agree with, but more so like, he obviously interweaves a lot of things that are benign and taken in isolation are true, but he interweaves them with opinions that are just like terribly misogynistic and clearly like aggressive towards women, right?
Also, dude walks like he's holding in a fat shit. It's ridiculous. You can't be acting like that when you walk like that.
You know, I don't disagree. He walks a little bit weird.
Yeah.
A little weird. A little sus.
Anyway.
But like, yeah, if I say some things that, you know, are when taken out of context could easily throw me into that.
Right.
I think the people that are attempting that gotcha bullshit are the ones that are just as much a point of the problem as anybody else. Because now they're crying wolf, right? You're trying to thrust somebody who's like not only not adjacent to this caricature that you're trying to align him with, but also opposed, like outwardly opposed. And you're trying to reframe it such that like, well, actually you claim you're opposed on the surface, but you guys are pretty much the same because you said these 3 words or something of that nature. It's like, we're human, we're all growing, we're all learning the rules as we go, and we're all going to slip up, right? If you don't understand that it's a spectrum and you don't judge people on their full body of work, then you're going to find something wrong with everybody. And it's going to be one of those things where if you stick around long enough, everyone will become the villain, right? Don't meet your heroes because you're just going to tear them to shreds. And the problem with that is that is a glass house situation where the people constantly throwing stones have a lot of skeletons in their closets as well and don't take well to being called out. Right. So it's like when the call outs get returned, it's I'm a smaller platform than you. You're punching down like you are. You should be the bigger man and just apologize for the things that I'm pointing out. Like I'm trying to help you. It's like, no, you're not. You're trying to further your agenda and you're trying to take my platform and weaponize it against me. Yeah. Right. And to some degree, I felt like that's what led to the Nagy thing getting brought up in the interview is because the D-Negs thing felt like an agenda almost. Yeah. Even though it wasn't, Joey's the one who asked the question, but because it was so anecdotal to Ebony, it now comes off as I want this man to apologize. I want the old D-Negs back. And that's fine. Like we all do. Like Daniel's gotten a little bit cringe in his old age. Oh. Look, I love the guy, but like, you know, he just doesn't. He absolutely, more than anybody else in this industry, given the weight of his platform, how big of a deal he is to the community as a whole, he, more than anybody else, needs somebody to proofread all of his tweets. He 100% needs someone to look at everything. Okay. Dan and I used to do this for ourselves whenever we were roommates. Like when my platform was growing and he was already at like the 25K mark and stuff like that, we're very outspoken people who lean on crass humor and aren't afraid to like kind of overstep a little bit. And constantly he would write things that I found to be hilarious, but I would read and say, don't tweet that. Yeah.
You need that now.
Yeah.
When you're sending to a group and say, like, should I hit send?
Right. Like Daniel and to Ebony's credit, she pointed this out. She said, I don't think there's anybody around Nagy saying that what he does is okay. But it seems like there's no one around Daniel kind of checking him, saying like, stop pressing fucking send, man. Like, just stop it, you know? And
look away.
It's so difficult because it's like on one end, I'm sure he feels constantly under attack, and I feel like he probably needs to defend his side, but it's just not true, man. You've already built the platform. You know, you don't need to be out in the streets. You don't need to be in the trenches slinging it out every day with a bunch of eggs on Twitter. Right? Like, let your engagement with somebody who only has 43 followers be a positive experience where they can say, like, wow, Daniel Negreanu responded to me. Right? Yeah. Like, I remember, to be fair, he's also a little bit in the Daniel camp, but I remember when Scott Van Pelt replied to me in a tweet. This was maybe like 5 or 6 years ago. Also, Pat McAfee, whenever the Apostle thing happened, he replied to me in a tweet.
Really?
Yeah, and it was
that
like,
must have been a big day for you.
I was like screenshotting him, like, yo, this is awesome. Like, I'm having a conversation with a guy who like
That's the cool part about social media.
Yeah, it's like he has no business talking to a nobody like me, right?
Wow.
And like I was so excited over
amazing.
It. And it's like, imagine the people that are screenshotting the D-Negs tweets.
I love that for you.
I love that. Exactly.
Right? But like the people screenshotting the D-Negs tweets are like, look, I got this asshole to call me a dickhead on Twitter.
Sounds like they want to bet. Like, I bet you I can, like, I bet
I can say something crazy enough that Daniel will like try to anally feed me my teeth.
Well, that's sort of something that I've been mindful of, and I was mindful of when I was streaming on Twitch more and stuff, where sort of what you give attention to grows.
Yeah.
So I at the beginning was very combative, as I like to be sometimes, with shocking with the people who would come in and sort of like troll me and be mean, and then I just noticed there was more and more of that coming.
Yeah.
And so once I started ignoring that and I started actually only interacting with people who were being normal, then the problem went away.
Is this why negging exists?
Yeah, but this is why I ignore it.
But negging also exists because
and I don't want more of it.
We're just insecure as humans.
Yeah.
Across the aggregate, right? And it's like, to your point, that's why I'm always so particular about, like, forget what goes out to the airwaves. I care more about us as a collective group. So it's like I'm constantly kind of checking the atmosphere here, because when we pile on to someone within the group, when we start to neg somebody on air in a not necessarily good natured way or not an obvious good natured way, just watch the comments.
Yeah.
Just watch the comments. Like, everybody chooses a side.
Yeah.
And it ends up being like host pitted against host. And it's like, well, that's clearly not what we're trying to create here. Right. It's like, it's so much different if you're running a bit. Yeah. Right. Like when you're running a bit, it's so obvious.
Like the tab.
Yeah. The tab bit is great. Like nobody's ever called Conrad like anything negative as far as like
after whatever it is you're gonna say.
That's why I stopped myself.
Watch out. I wonder. I think they have.
I was about to give him ammo.
There's been like negative connotation toward it, but I just don't give a fuck. So.
I don't think it's been towards the tab. I think that like you get unfair hate for like laughing all the time and being the laugh track.
No, I don't think.
And we don't lean into that bit enough, I guess.
What, the laughing bit?
Well, just that he's a laugh track.
Yeah.
Case in point.
I would love to take like just like cut that out. Take that little laughing segment.
Right, the audio snippet.
And then you can download episodes of Friends from YouTube where the laugh track is removed.
And change it. And add it.
All right, so first of all, like if you ever watch an episode of Friends without the laugh track,
it's so weird.
It's frightening.
Yeah, it's
like,
so weird.
It is it's so weird because it's like,
really?
I don't think we understand how much we lean on social cues. Because a lot of the humor there is like a little bit deadpan or awkward, right? It's like an awkward occurrence where as a viewer you find it funny.
Well, there's also probably pauses without the laugh track.
A little
which
bit,
wouldn't
but
be there otherwise.
Not quite as much as you think. They were actually, it's not even a laugh track. I think they filmed in front of a live studio audience. Yeah. Right. But anyway, like it's often like an observer who's laughing at a funny situation where if you're actually in it, it's not funny at all. And like you see some of these awkward scenarios come up. Like the one I remember is when his boss calls him in, and Ross had this aggro thing going on where somebody ate his sandwich out of his fridge, and he's been putting like post-it notes on it and all this other stuff, and his coworkers are getting uncomfortable. So his boss is like, I understand that like you've been having a problem with your coworkers. He's like, somebody now, we call this sandwich the Moist because it's so good. It's a turkey sandwich, yada yada, and somebody ate my sandwich. And the boss goes, oh, actually, I think I ate that sandwich. And he's like, my sandwich? He goes, yeah, actually, it's in my trash can right now. He goes, my sandwich? He goes, it was a very big sandwich. You ate my sandwich. But without the laughter, it's like watching a scary movie unfold. You think he's going to get murdered, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I just want to roll like Conrad over that as the new laugh track. I think it actually might be funnier.
Yeah. I guess like there's something to that with the social cues and the objective third-party onlook, where it's like, oh, this is actually supposed to be a funny situation because we as the audience are removed from it.
Correct. Yeah, you're not there. That's how you know like a good or like a well-filmed scene in a movie is that it's so cringe that you've become inserted into it, right?
Like
and like you want to look away because it's so cringe.
Yeah.
Or like it's so awkward. Like a young man going in for a first kiss, and they've built it up in such a way that it's so palpable as to how awkward it is. Like I felt that before, and you just like want to look away as he's about to get rejected.
I hate that.
Of course it is.
I hate that.
That's why I love The Office.
That's also why you like Dr. Pimple Popper.
The Office is like that.
Like looking at Michael Scott through a third-party lens is just a blast.
It's like the uncomfortable, the cringe.
Yeah.
Like I just find it so funny.
And no laugh track.
I find that show not funny. Like I find it super cringe.
You didn't give it a chance.
you you can't handle the cringe.
It's true. I shy away from that. Like,
I
that's,
love it.
That's
I
definitely not my
lean
type of
in
humor.
so hard. That's why I
yeah.
want to have a first date on air. I mean, you know how cringe that'll be, but I will love it because
Actually,
it's so
as you
cringe.
describe it, I know I said I wanted to be here. I don't.
No, you guys don't want to be here.
guys-
You're gonna
if
feel awkward.
If either of us have a date on the podcast, like a podcast date, they're not here.
Yeah, it'd be more fun
You
just
wanna do
watching
it
it and
too?
being in
I'd
the
do it.
chat.
Yeah.
Really?
Of course I do. I'd do anything. I'm an
Okay.
idiot.
So we'll both do it.
Oh,
Yeah.
double date
Double
on the
date.
pod.
No,
I like
No,
that.
definitely
not
not.
a double date. We're just gonna be, and
I
we're
would
gonna
love-
we're gonna set the lights. We'll have a candle. You know, maybe Guapo
We'll get some
will
food, maybe.
will be here, like playing some nice
Brushing his
music.
teeth with tortillas.
Guapo's gonna be here like no tortillas. Guapo's gonna be here running the show. That's how.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, but maybe he'll add in some nice,
Yeah, he'll have some
sensual
romance.
music
Yeah,
in
of
the
course.
background.
some extra added effects, if
Yeah.
you will.
Yeah, little boys to
Little
men. I'll make
Marvin
love
Gaye.
to you. Yeah,
You don't have to do all. You definitely don't have to do any of that. But like, there's an episode from The Office where there's like a dinner party.
It's the
probably-
best episode
It's
ever.
one of the most
Yeah, it
cringe
is so
situations to ever watch. But you know you can laugh and because you're not there.
Yeah, you can laugh for relief.
Yeah.
It's the relief laugh. I
Michael
think
and Jan
I'm
are trying
addicted
to-
to relief. You know, it's why I like the toenails. I like the pimples. I like
Oh my
to
God.
laugh at cringe.
Yeah.
Chin's DR Mamacita said, Melissa, we can go on a double date with Christian.
Let's go. I'm in. You have anyone to set me up with from the DR or
No,
what's
she's
up?
trying to make it a three-way.
A throuple.
Oh, throuple, if you will.
interesting.
Well, he has to come back to Vegas first,
Well,
right?
yeah.
Yep.
Oh, that would actually be great if the entire Melissa date experiment here just had Conrad's laugh track playing over it.
But it's live studio audience.
Honestly,
Someone-
maybe.
I would
He's just sitting
die.
there
He
laughing.
would. You would. I don't think you would be able to handle
Maybe
the
we
uncomfortableness.
put him in like the back room watching a stream of it
You
happen
hear
and him
me
just laughing over
Yeah.
you guys.
He's not allowed to comment. He's just allowed to just sit there and laugh.
Or it could go really well, and you
Sure.
guys witness
There's,
the
like,
beginning of who
something
I'm going to
beautiful.
marry.
I mean, that
Yes.
could be amazing. Like
Amazing.
3 years from now, we just have your wedding on air.
The
Right?
only way that thing goes well is if it's like the most disgusting conversation humanly possible.
Yeah.
That would be what would lead to wifey.
That's usually how my dates go if I have them,
He
which
just
I
wa-
don't really.
He just walks in, like locks eyes with her, and shits in the middle of the floor.
make a statement.
You're the one.
I would make a statement for sure.
You're going to real date.
We might get.
can do
I
that
mean,
for you.
we might go viral off that.
Yeah, for sure,
So
100%.
Yeah.
I like this idea.
That's what the platform is for.
Yeah,
right?
so it's clear we're being very responsible with our platform, as we've discussed at length today. I can't imagine a better usage for it, to be quite frank.
yeah.
All right, that's going to wrap it for us today. I hope you guys enjoyed this discussion. Please comment below. Let us know what you thought of the Ebony Joey interview. If you watched it, let us know what you thought of today's reaction to said interview. Don't forget to subscribe before you're on your way out. For anybody who is a Sulfur TV member, don't forget that we have launched the new range viewer tool. So this currently is 100 big blind mid-stake rate. Mixed mid-stake rake ranges with varying opening sizes from 2x all the way up to 3x. It also has 200 big blind mid-stake raising ranges, mid-stake rake ranges. Next to be added will be 100 big blind no rake. So please take advantage of that. As always, we will be back same time tomorrow. I actually won't be here. I am heading to the bike. I think we got a little bit of 5100 teed up.
in the mix.
Wait, in the streets.
Wait a minute. Who called you bad? Who got you back on?
I don't know. There's a good chance that the lineup's just not great and they need a seat to be filled, but
They need a whale.
I'm here.
They need a whale.
Exactly.
That's probably for my stream, right?
I think the text went as such. Hey, are you free Friday? Yeah, what do you got lined up? I have one person who's also willing to play. Are you in? Yeah. 3 minutes later. Game's full.
Let's go, baby. That is the energy that we
Berkey's
need.
playing.
5 minutes later. Game's full. Stakes are doubled.
Wow.
I'm like,
Hey, Berkey's
okay.
playing. Who wants to come out?
Yeah. Who wants to go to LA?
Can it please be the please? Yeah.
You just find out when you get to the table, everybody flew in from like fucking
Yeah.
halfway across the world.
Yeah, it's like
the four corners of the earth.
it's like 4 East Coasters and an Australian. You're just like, what the fuck is going
Well,
on?
they told me
here?
you were gonna play, mate.
Honestly, that'd be a dream. The Aussies love me, man. They absolutely
Kirk.
get after
We
it.
need the Sulfur Y Australia trip.
Totally agree.
I want to find my Australian
That
man.
could be where the date happens.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm in for this.
Aussies would be so down.
Oh,
they're
100%.
down for everything.
100%. You know what? I truly do think you need an Australian man.
I do too, and so does my whole family.
I think that's like the floor.
My family is Australian, and they're like, "Why are you not dating an Australian guy?" Like the humor is just that.
It's the floor of tolerance for you, right? It's like you have to be at least Australian.
Yeah.
In order to tolerate a Melissa in your life.
Yeah, probably.
And they wouldn't even bat an eye at the disgusting shit that you're into.
they live with dangerous insects and animals. Like,
they'd just be happy that you don't pose a threat to them.
Yeah.
You know? Like, she's harmless, mate.
Yeah, exactly. You're perfect.
Nailed it.
Sold.
All right, we'll be back. Well, I won't be back, but the rest of the squad will be here. You're left in good hands. I hope you guys enjoy.
You're leaving us.
I hope you enjoy the Friday show.
Don't leave us.
Landon, Melissa, please don't burn the place down. We'll see you guys noon tomorrow, and I think the Live at the Bike stream starts at 3, so be sure to check that out. We'll see you then.
Wow.
Peace.